I'm Adam Pelche, here representing Windsor Public Library, and I'm talking with Eva H.D., a poet known for numerous works including Rotten Perfect Mouth, Shiner, and most recently, this collection, which I'm holding in my hands, Light Wounds, which is a hybrid between your haiku and the photographs of Kendall Townend. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And just off the bat, Eva, thank you so much for agreeing to this.
Whoa, yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Obviously, Light Wounds is a new release. It's your first since, I want to say 2016, because that's when Shiner was released through Mansfield Press. Um, it's been a while. I guess what prompted the combination of photography and haiku for this book, because it seems so, I don't want to say distinct from your other works thematically. I feel there's a lot of issues still being addressed that I've read in Rotten Perfect Mouth and Shiner, but the form is unique. Again, the hybrids and also haiku, which I haven't read from you before.
All right. Yeah. Well, I just do I think they're probably not really haiku. I think there's some complex rules or something like that. They're just 5 7 5. And I know there's other stuff going on. Like haiku's supposed to have all these things that I don't have. Probably. I don't know what they are. I don't actually know that much about poetry, as it turns out. But haiku are definitely short, and I like the way that you've written one. You never know if you've written a poem, I imagine, but you definitely know you've written a haiku because it's just a haiku. It's right there, and I could write them. Back when I was gainfully employed, I worked in a bar, so it's nice to have something that you can write in between serving people. You know, you have these little small moment. And then my friend Kendall, who's a very good photographer and builder of boats and man about town, was showing me some of his, a few years back, I guess like 5 years ago or something like that. He was showing me some of his photos, and they reminded me some, because he does these diptychs. He puts them together, like a naked chick and like a rock or something, and there's like a little conversation they have with each other, and it reminded me of a haiku, you know, the way it kind of turns like a figure skater or season or something, you know, it turns. And I was like, hey, these are just like haiku. And he asked me what I meant, and I was like, oh, I write these like garbage haikus at work all the time. And then I showed one to him, and then he was like, ooh, I could match that with these pictures. So we started doing it just for fun. And then we ended up with like many hundreds of them. So we thought we'd try to make a book. And so we crowdfunded, what do you call it? Kickstarter. Because I have a friend who made a film on Kickstarter. I mean, not on the subject of it, but like with money from it. The film Anomalisa was made with like, but they gathered up like, I don't know, they got a lot of cash, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I was like, I'm sure I could rustle up enough to print a book. I don't know. Does that even answer your question?
I mean, it certainly did, because, you know, I'm asking the origin of how this came about. It seems like it was pretty organic rather than being too methodically planned out, I guess.
Ooh, yes, you're right. You've identified my Achilles heel there.
But I find that's really interesting, because going through here, that organic nature, rather than being, I'd have to say, compiled for an overarching theme or idea where all the poems connect in one way or another, it does feel like these brief moments for me of elucidation or just stumbling across these profound moments that throughout your day.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. That's what it should be like. I think that's what I think it should be like. I like to think that, well, I know that it's true that anybody can write a poem, and I don't know if anybody can write like, you know, Derek Walcott or Homer or something, like one of these giant, gorgeous, delicious epics, but, you know, like a small child can write a haiku. So it's not, it's just a nice, it's the same way anybody could take a picture. Like not anybody takes a picture like Gordon Parks, like, but anybody can snap, snapshot a moment. And it might turn out to be a really beautiful one. Even if it's like a toddler who pressed a button on a camera by mistake, like it could happen.
And when you were writing these small poems, was it that they were matched with pre-existing photos that Kendall had taken?
No, Kendall totally matches them.
Oh, okay.
He does that. So I write them and then he that's nice too. I like that it gets sent out of my hands. Like the way the wealthy educate their young. They just send them out. And it's nice that way, because then it's like I write something, especially because I could be a bit of a downer, that this like lugubrious garbage, but then I send it to Kendall and he finds something funny. He finds like a funny photo to mix it with, so it gets he tends to turn the direction, I find, of the writing. Or sometimes he has a picture in mind and he'll be like, you got any haikus on the topic of ketchup or something? And we're like, oh, I could write you one.
Did you have any haikus on ketchup?
That what? Oh, and that didn't go into the book, Ketchup Hands. No, but he gave me that title. He does that sometimes. I didn't have one, but because usually I fire it right back. I don't think too much. I just, in the next 5 minutes, I just send him something. So no, I didn't have any, but I scared one up. There's definitely some where he gave me the title because he had a photo in his mind, But most of them, what else? Oh, I do have the power of veto. If I really don't like the match he came up with, I'll be like, not another picture of your grandkids. Give me a picture of like a pebble with some blood on it or something, But yeah, that's pretty much how it goes.
You do have some very creative titles here, which I think create a great contrast with the poem and with the imagery. Throwing out a dead woman's paxil.
Oh, yeah.
Frogs do not exactly sing. That's another one I really love the title of. And there's just something so unique and so evocative, evoking something that I can't quite put my finger on. Yeah.
Oh, that makes me so happy. That's very pleasing to me. Oh. Yeah, now I can picture it too. Unfortunately, I don't think about these things too much before I do them, but it's kind of nice to think about them after.
It really brings up a question I have for a lot of poets I talk to, and some have really methodical answers, some just don't know, but where do you get the idea for your poetry from? Do you have it from real life experiences? Do you just kind of stumble across notions to write about? What is your praxis, basically?
I'm not like a real writer, I just do it. I think it's probably frowned upon to write for the purposes of catharsis, I imagine. But that's why I just see stuff and write it down.
You said not a real writer. What do you consider a real writer to be?
Probably someone who isn't me. I think that's a good start. Like maybe the Earth doesn't feel like a real planet either, because it's just like looking into the solar system. Like, I don't look like that. I don't even glow or whatever. What is a real writer? Yeah, we're not talking about a physical quantity, so I guess there isn't really any definition. So that's helpful.
Your compilation or composing style, I guess, for the actual collections fascinates me. I read something, it might be rumor, it might be true, I want to confirm this. I heard that for Shiner, when you were pressed for what order the poems would go into the collection, you basically just threw the poems on the floor.
Oh, I did, yes.
And
yes, I literally threw them on the
in.
floor.
Yeah.
I didn't want to, yeah, I've never even read that book. It's ridiculous. I didn't want to do it. It was like an impasse. And I was obliged. But I don't have, it's also not a talent that I have. Some people are talented, like musicians are talented at album sequencing. Some of them aren't. They're just better at writing songs, and some writers or editors are talented at sequencing a book, and I am not. And yeah, nobody wanted to do. I didn't want to do it, so I was like, well, what? I don't know. I didn't have an opinion, so I did. I printed them off, and then I threw them on the floor. Oh, and I had this stack. That's right. It was my best friend Alex old resumes from like when he was a tree planter. He was just a lad. I had this like, you know, we used to be roommates, so I still find like in my stuff, like I have these bits and pieces of his detritus. They're like toenail clippings or something, except for their old resumes. And I was like, oh, this is good. They're blank on the one side. That's probably why I saved them. So I printed it all off, and then I threw them on the floor, and then I picked them up. And then they're...
Compared to the process of your first collection, Rotten Perfect Mouth, um, what was the contrast between the writing of those two collections then? Because it seems
Well,
like...
I didn't write them though. They were just there. I get that's not a very good answer. They had just been, you know, like I didn't have like an idea in mind. Dennis DeClercq at Manfield, sequenced that book, Rotten Perfect Mouth, which is very interesting. I would never have thought of doing it the way he did it, but I had just written, like I hadn't written them with anything in mind. They just happened to, like he said, do you have like a bunch of poems? And I gave him a bunch, and then he, I guess, used his magic to sift through them. It's interesting because when I read through like that manuscript, or like I flipped through it at the very least, it interested me because it tells a story, right? Like he's good at putting them in order, but it becomes then a bit of a fiction, you know, like it, which it should, but like I would never come up with that fiction. I was like, I wouldn't have recognized myself as the writer of that book.
You know, with that said, with the sort of narrative going through, particularly Rotten Perfect Mouth, what I find so fascinating about it is it did get some attention within the last year, really, because of the film that you had a poem featured in. That was a film by Charlie Kaufman, who you mentioned actually earlier, mentioning the film Anomalisa. I'm thinking of ending things, and you had a poem in it called Bone Dog. What I thought was very interesting was that Bone Dog is actually not a poem featured in here. So how much input did you have in that aspect of the film, or did you have any input in that regard?
So Trixie. Yeah, I did. So Charlie asked me, there was a spot for a poem in his film. And at first he actually had her, he was thinking of having her recite 38 Michigans, which isn't really like, I don't think it fits as well. But then he was like, well, do you have a different poem? And I was like, why don't you try this one? And he was like, yeah, okay, I like that. And then, and then there's that scene where she finds it in the book. Oh yes, and he asked me what, but like if I had a preference, and I was like, well, why don't you use Rotten Perfect Mouth, because it's looks cool. My friend Sonia took that cover photo, and I'm very fond of it. It's a little girl that used to live in the like shack behind her parents' place in Belleville. Before, apparently this little house that this girl lived in actually burned down eventually, but this was before it burned down. And she's like, what was it? Her name was Yvonne. That's what, so apparently. Anyway, it was taken many, many years ago, and Sonia found it in like a trunk full of like random crap while I was looking for something to go on the cover of Rotten Perfect Mouth. So it was like fortuitous. Anyway, I think it's a pretty picture, so I was like, use that. And then, and that's kind of fun because it doesn't exist. Bone Dog doesn't exist in any collection.
Yeah, in terms of Bone Dog, the narrative itself, you talked about how there was sort of a narrative feeling for Rotten Perfect Mouth, and this one definitely, to me, seems narrative. And what I find so interesting about this piece, as with a lot of your other pieces, you really do seem to embody the narrators, and you have this sort of motif almost where I notice a lot of poems start with an identifier, an I, me, but rather than be about, I'm assuming, rather than being about Eva H.D., it ends up being about these characters.
I mean, the world is made of characters, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
suppose one's brain is as well. I mean, does anything ever happen in your life that's not in the character of one thing? Like, what is not a character?
Well, I guess there's truth in that because we define ourselves as characters in one way or another, and whatever happens to us in our lives, there's a sort of artifice involved somewhere. At least,
Oh, do you think characters are artificial, like they're a construct, or do you mean a character like just a personality?
um, as a construct, actually.
I have often worked in, you know, I was a bike messenger. I worked in bars. I worked in restaurants. So I've heard a lot of people talk at length. A lot of different people speak. So I guess it's possible they entered my consciousness. But I mean, I think anybody in the world, unless they're sort of hatched out of an egg and live a hermit, has heard many people. You know what I mean? Like you probably hear something in your head, like your parents' voice or a sibling or your partner or like, someone you don't want there, like some member of parliament or something like that. Like they're different voices or like a
Yeah.
novel you read. All these voices are going to be in there with their different lilt and cadence and pet words, like is that something you're putting on? Or no, it's just like it bleeds into your consciousness, right?
Mhm. You're not, at least maybe this is a point of clarification. I might be wrong. Is this a poem that is about your own personal experience and feelings, or is this about a character that you've created and this is through their perspective?
I'm trying to think, if you talk to a close friend about their problems, maybe they say, they're saying something new, like this is what's going on in my life, and maybe they're asking your advice or something. Often there's that moment, there's like the call and response thing where then you spit it back to them. You're like, okay, so you're saying like you feel like this is what, so you're like, okay, what am I going to do next?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the act of writing is always a little bit like that, where you've just like taken something and you spit it out. So as soon as you spit it out, I guess it is a construct or a character.
So it just kind of comes out. There's not too much forethought. It's more just, uh,
There's no forethought. I thought that was kind of obvious. I think that's probably a weakness in my writing, presumably. No, because if I gave it forethought, I mean, I would probably do something else if I took a moment.
so then if it's not a matter of having a lot of preparation of writing a poem, not a lot of consideration, it's just kind of automatic in a way. Do you go back to your poetry after you write it? And is that something you consider revisiting your poems, or once it's
No.
out, it's just out?
You know what? Bone Dog was going to be a haiku. There's this cool like bones picture that Kendall had. I think I had seen it, or maybe he matched it after. I don't know. Maybe I was thinking about bones. I was writing a haiku, but instead of having to go to work, I think I had a space of time, which will always like prescribe the length of a poem I write.
Mm.
You give me too much time, I'll just never shut up. But yeah, and I think that's what happened with Bone Dog. I was like, oh, I'll just write this little haiku, and then it was like, just started hemorrhaging.
Actually, this next question I have, it's addressing something that you said one time in an interview, and I'm just wondering how much truth there is to this. That around the time of Shiner, you said you were actually trying to quit writing poetry.
Oh yeah, I did say that.
Is that
Yeah, I gave up
true,
on
or?
quitting. That is true. It doesn't seem like it's a prospect. I don't know. I gave up on the possibility of that. Although maybe I should give it another crack. It was very like half-hearted, I suppose. Um yeah, quitting writing poetry doesn't really work that well for me. I think I thought at the time that it might, but I was wrong.
Well, I guess my big question for that is how come? What would be the motivation to quit writing it?
I think I felt a little put upon at
Mm.
that time. And I was uncomfortable with Shiner anyway. And I just felt like it's just weird. Maybe it's just odd to have something like a, it just seems like a bizarre thing to do. I guess anything with a lot of scrutiny, you know, seems like a bizarre thing to do. At that time, yeah, I felt it's probably because I don't know anything about making books and I'm uncomfortable with that. Also, that Bone Dog poem that was in the film, I don't think poetry people probably like it because I did send it because my friend who made the film was like, "Hey, this is a pretty good poem." So I was like, "Oh, maybe it's better than I thought." Um, but I did try to send it to some like, literary magazines and stuff. They didn't want it. Like it's not that cool to write poetry, but like it's not that cool to um do a lot of stuff. When people just, like it's not that cool to rollerblade either, but you always like once in a while you see somebody rollerblading by. It's like that's all right. Why not? Um, I do know that people that maybe some academics might think do not respond to poetry do, because I noticed one night when I was working at the bar on a Sunday around midnight, it was like this dank winter gross kind of night. There's just like a few old guys just like sitting at the bar. And one of them said, I can't even remember what it was. He said something about poetry that he was like, oh, well. And I was like, oh, really? Get a load of this. And I had a Philip Levine book with me from the
Oh,
library.
yeah.
And I read the guys, there was just like four of them. No, there was like three of them sitting at the bar, and a fourth one wandered in and was like, I read them What Work Is. You know that poem?
Yes.
So I just read it, and then you do have a captive audience because they need, obviously they don't like me, but they need me for the booze. So it's like they had to listen to this poem, and I read it to them, and they were gobsmacked. Also, all of them, they all teared up because Philip Levine has like a main line to the hearts of crusty old men who like don't cry or whatever. So it seemed to me that poetry is effective, where you might not think it might be.
Yeah. And I do think it's just a matter of really people discovering, I think, getting past the biases of what they assume poetry is. Because that's what I often come across. When people say they don't
Mm.
like poetry, what they really mean is they don't like what they're being told poetry or quote unquote good poetry should be.
But yeah, I think it's the same as anything. It's just what somebody has in their mind. Like someone says they don't like country music, you know, but then they're listening to like the Grateful Dead or something, singing folk
Mm-hmm.
songs because they don't know or they don't like, and then like it works with country and with hip hop. They
Mm-hmm.
they take from each other because they're both folk musics. And fans of both of those will always often say about the other that they don't listen to it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
usually turns out that they do. Yeah, I think it's just something that somebody says. Like they could be like, I hate poetry because they had a bad experience in school or something like that. But like, people might say they hate math while they're like counting their money away. Like they don't. You don't. What do you mean you hate math? Like it's something here in the world. You use it.
Mm-hmm.
You just mean you hate math class.
Mm-hmm. You hate
Um,
a certain context of it.
Sure. I also, yeah, it's just like all these people. You go to a funeral, you go to a wedding, people always need their poems. Or
Mm-hmm.
they need song lyrics, and song lyrics are poems,
Yeah,
I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
You said before in this conversation and in other interviews, you don't really know when a poem is finished, when a poem's a poem. Sometimes I think it's ridiculous to even try to come up with a very solid definition of what that even means, what a poem is compared to another form.
Yeah.
When does, it blur into stage play? When does it blur into narrative fiction? I think sometimes we
Yeah.
love to compartmentalize things a little bit too much for the sake of ease.
Yeah, that's true. Just today I was looking up, because I was trying to remember something. I was looking up Leanne Batasmosak Simpson's Islands of Decolonial Love. It's like this
Mm,
book, yeah.
yes.
And I was like, oh, that was a great poetry book. And I like looked it up, and the description that I found said it was prose. I think it said it was stories or something. I don't know. It confused me because I was like, I could have sworn I just assumed it was poetry, but I hadn't asked, I didn't like check the packaging.
Yeah.
Um, which is fine too. Like it could be prose, it was great either way. Whatever it was, I loved it, but I didn't know. And I don't think it matters. I mean, I assume it doesn't. Maybe it's too presumptuous, but I assume it doesn't matter to her either because it was just really good.
Agreed. There was another book I read not too long ago. It was actually described as a novel by Lawrence Ferlinghetti called Little Boy, but
Oh yeah, I was
oh,
just looking at that the other day, thinking I hadn't read it.
and the whole thing, rather than being a narrative or a novel to me, I would assume it's more like one long form poem. But again, the ease of marketing something for easy
Right.
consumption. Yeah.
And I guess it's for all those like country fans who think they don't like hip hop or whatever. They're like, okay, I could buy this book by Lawrence Ferlinghetti because it's prose. Plays are often like that. Like two playwrights I always really liked were Daniel McIver and Bryden McDonald, and they both write. Um, I think they're both from the East Coast as well. I mean, as well as each other. I'm not from the East Coast, but they write plays, but the plays they seem to be poetry, or like in Tazake Shange, right? Like for Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rain Will,
Yes. Yeah.
which she called that a choreo poem, because she was a dancer too, so it has the movements. But that could be, yeah. I don't know. It seems to me like it could be anything, depending on who wanted.
So, with that said, do you care about people addressing you saying you're a poet? What do you make of
Oh,
that term apply to you?
do I care about it? Um, I guess it's like saying like, do I care about people throwing money at me? I mean, they just don't. They don't do that. So like, I'd have to, cross that bridge when it comes. If they said I was a poet, I'd probably be a little embarrassed. But maybe that's common for people, like, because it's just not a common thing for people to. It sounds like the kind of thing you might have to live up to.
Hmm.
Have you ever I'm sure this has happened to you, like if you're at a party, as you say, or something, someone's introducing you and they introduce you just like a little, like they're like, oh yeah, he's really great at like, whatever it is, and you're not that good at it. And then you feel like you have to, and like, oh yeah, this is my friend Adam. He's like an amazing skateboarder. I'm not that good. And then everyone's like, yeah, do a trick. Maybe it's just the cowardice of homing to available concrete answers because I shy away from existential vagaries opening up their terrifying yop.
Just before we end off, Eva, I know we talked a little bit earlier about you potentially doing a reading.
Okay, I read you Nothing a Wolf Can Do. And here is the epigraph. Nothing a wolf can do is quite so unpleasant as what can be done to a wolf in zoos and circuses by those who are assumed not to be wolfish, to be the civilized curators of wolfdom, which is Rebecca West from Black Lamb and Gray Falcon. All right, then here's the poem. They're still fighting the fire north of the tracks. They're still scrubbing coffee grounds from the deck of the bright blue brigantine on the dark blue water. There's enough spilt rye on my boots to bake a cake with. Latissimus Dorsey, the mussel on the side, does a tap dance and calls for wine. After the fire in the warehouse came the guns in the night, apparently. A little path, I suppose, and a path by the railway tracks crawling with cops. And after that, an SUV alight in the alley next door. What can I say? The kids are bored, and who can blame them? Pastry shops and cafe boutiques simpering down the strip like grade 8 girls. The kids are limping along in tight trousers, hoping for anything new. Although their parents have kept them informed anything new, there is nothing new under the sun. Down at the harbor, the boats are preparing for spring. It's kite flying weather, so of course, everybody is having brunch. Brunch has become so fucking massive, it begins at dinner on the previous day and lasts for a week. The wind is whining for a blizzard or a sail to fill. North of the tracks, life is exactly the same, minus the guts of one building and one boy, plus one brand new police station. The graffiti on the trains coming through from Calgary and Saskatoon is copied from TV and is sad about never seeing New York, and also sad for its own prairie home, a sheaf of rustic bucolic shit it must pretend it's never seen. The fire has got so tiresome, the cops are falling asleep, and the firemen are stretching, and small boys are buying ice creams at the corner store and pinching their sisters, and in the leftover smoke, the trains pass so slowly, I could almost leave.
Thank you so much, Eva.
No worries. Thank you. I forgot about that one.
Actually, what's coming up in the near future? Are you writing anything else? Planning to release anything else?
To release. It's like I'm setting it free. It's like a bird. Yeah, I'm always writing things. I don't think mostly people want to publish them, but I am always writing things. So yeah, I have a build up of stuff. Maybe I'm kind of like, I was just reading about Allen Ginsberg recently, and it reminded me, he's always writing like bits of things on like little receipts. I'm like that, you know, like got all my bits and pieces.
Yeah, I think Frank O'Hara did that a lot too. He just wrote on napkins.
Yeah, that's right, because he had a job. That's the thing. He had an actual job, like me, or like I used to. So that's why you gotta like to scribble things down.
For your new collection, Light Wounds, of course, it can be borrowed from our library, but if people want to get their own copy of it, what do people need to do to get their own edition of Light Wounds?
They should go to www.lightwounds.com and they can order it there, or they could just email me if they want, and I'll, they want to pay me in some weird way, like not on the website, that's cool. But yeah, if they just go to the website, they can order it there, or they could send me an email and like send me a check or cash, or barter is okay, but there isn't very much in this pandemic time that I want to barter for. So.
Understandable.
Yeah, mostly money. We like money.
And also, if people want more information about your work and also about this collection as well as your previous ones, they can go to your website. That's Eva-HD.com, and they can get some more information there.
Yeah, my friend Alan, who used to be a librarian, he made that, so I always forget it exists. But you're right, they can go there and find it.
Excellent. Well, Eva, this has been such a great talk. I really appreciate you taking the time of day. And for all our viewers out there, you can borrow Eva's collections. I have 2 of them in my hands, Light Wounds and Rotten Perfect Mouth from the Windsor Public Library.
Yay, Windsor Public Library.